Hi everyone, welcome to Lumination. My name is Adaora and I'm extremely passionate about helping people live a purposeful life. On this show, I'm going to be talking with so many amazing people whose journeys I hope will inspire you, will motivate you, and will empower you to do so many amazing things in this world, because I believe that you were made for greatness. And so I want you to listen to all of this stuff, and I want you to remind yourself that you are light. Today's guest, Ozoz Sokoh, is a food explorer and exploration geologist who's passionate about food, cooking, eating, dreaming, writing, and photographing it, especially on her blog, Kitchen Butterfly. A traveler by plate, she uses food ways to explore the world because food is more than eating. In 2013, she coined the phrase, the new Nigerian kitchen, her philosophy and practice to celebrate and document all aspects of Nigerian cuisine, from classic recipes to reinventing and representing Nigerian food. Her work has been featured on CNN's African Voices, Anthony Bourdain's Parts Unknown, and Food 52. On this episode, Ozoz talks about taking a leap of faith, her pursuit for purpose, and passion on her life's journey. Ozoz, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's beautiful to see you. It's always beautiful to see you.
Thank you, Adaora. Glad to be here.
Thanks. And you've hosted me at your home a few times. Enjoyed the food and the company and your family, which is very beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so I felt like, people really needed to hear your story and your life and all the amazing stuff that we talk about over the table, the dinner table, right?
Well, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to share what I can.
Yeah. So we'll start off with the geologist to food story. How did that happen? What was the journey like? Did you always know that you were gonna do things with food?
I pretty much started out life not as a geologist. I did urban and regional planning in Ife for a few years, and then at that time there were lots of strikes, and I convinced my father to send me abroad to study literature, and my dad was like, no way am I sending you to study literature. That's something you can do on the weekend. So I chose geology because I knew Nigeria was oil and gas rich and that I would basically get a good job. And I think in my naivety at that time, I thought getting a good job would be equivalent to happiness. And that's all, I was concerned about. But I went to university in Liverpool, studied geology, came back to Nigeria, started working as a geologist and cooking and loving food. But I didn't think that my love for food would be anything more than just cooking for my family and friends. But in 2007, I moved to the Netherlands. At that time, I worked at Shell. So I moved to the Netherlands and I was really homesick and I was close to depression. And I knew that I needed to find something, an outlet, something that would give me comfort outside of the constraints of work, 9 to 5, dealing with colleagues, leadership, and all of that. So I continued cooking. And then one night, my friend, it was a Friday night, I remember very clearly, my Mexican friend Paula came round to dinner and I was making Chinese. And while I was prepping everything, because I'd been at work that day, so I was cooking, after work, I was prepping everything, and she came and she sat down and was working on her blog, and I was cooking and I was thinking of how beautiful, like, the spring onions were and the bell peppers. And then I'm like, Paula writes a blog. Why can't I write a blog? I mean, it would bring together my love for food, writing, and photography. I was like, okay, I'm going to write a blog. And this was in September of 2008.
Right.
And it took me 9 months because at that time I used to be a perfectionist, so everything had to be just right. So it took me 9 months to birth the blog. But in June of 2009, I started Kitchen Butterfly. And what happened is that all the depression that I felt at work, the unhappiness with performance reviews and bosses who didn't always mean what they said, and, colleagues who I felt sometimes were being underhand, I could finally channel all my anxiety, all my pain, unhappiness into this creative endeavor that was writing, cooking, and that was Kitchen Butterfly. And so that was the early movement from geologist full-time to geologist and food lover.
Right.
You know, side by side.
And why did you call it Kitchen Butterfly?
Okay. So around that time, my kids were young and there was a butterfly garden near where we live. Right. So when we went to the butterfly garden, and it was interesting because I could see all the stages of the butterfly. So I could see the egg, I could see the chrysalis, and all the stages from moth to when the butterflies emerge from the cocoon. And when I thought back to my journey as someone who grew up not eating till she was 9 and, you know, in and out of hospital and really stressing my parents, to traveling abroad and going to Wimpy, which is like one of the early fast food joints. And my father took my sister and I ate a hamburger for the first time without threat or tears, you know. My father was shocked. He offered me a second one. I had it. I ate. I was too full. I cried. But there was that journey. There was that change in not eating to eating to a stage where I began to experiment. So for me, it was like a metamorphosis of sorts, which is quite similar to the butterfly. And I knew that I wanted the name to be rooted in the kitchen, because I feel like the kitchen is the birthplace of so many things. The kitchen and the dining table, but, you know, as a cradle, as a place where things begin, for me, it's the kitchen.
That's beautiful. So, I'm sure a lot of people don't even know that, right? So they're like, oh, Kitchen Butterfly, where did she get it from? But that's a beautiful story to share. Now, I think maybe 1 or 2 years ago, we were talking about you taking the leap, making the leap out of full-time employment, and then, you know, doing this fully because it's something that you're extremely passionate about. And you were going through a period where you were so sure that this was a huge part of your purpose. You know, and it's like, I want to do this. Like, I feel comfortable doing this. Every time I express this, like, I feel like I'm in alignment with what it is that I'm meant to be doing, you know, and that was pretty much how you felt. And in that period, I remember you just, you know, the discomfort where it's like, I'm comfortable on one hand in terms of, I want to do this, but on the other hand, this is like going to disrupt everything, you know, and this is like fast forward 2 years later and you're doing it, like you're doing it full time. So I just want you to sort of share a little bit about, you know, where you were 2 years ago when you were thinking about this, and, you know, at what point did you say, you know what, I'm committing my life to this?
Okay. So I worked as a geologist for 15 years, right out of school into a 9 to 5, waking up at 5 a.m. And I did that for 15 years. But I think halfway through that, I was pretty sure that I wanted a career in food. So there was a point where I had to make a choice about what it was and how it was, and I wanted to spend the rest of my life. And I knew that that was in food, but I wasn't really clear on the path. I wasn't clear on the how. And one thing that helped me was quite early on in my career, I had mentors. I hired personal coaches because I figured that if I wanted to journey anywhere, I would need to have a kind of roadmap. And so I made a near-term roadmap next year, next 2 to 5 years, and then a 5 to 10 years. And the process of working through that, reflecting on really what I wanted to do, brought clarity. And one of the things I knew that I wanted to do is teach, right? So I always thought I wanted to teach early literacy, and I wanted to teach people English and maybe essay writing and bring a bit of science into it. But one day my daughter woke up and she was like, we're talking, and she was like, you know, you really should teach home economics. And I was like, oh my God, actually, that's actually really what I want to do, you know, because I feel like if we taught home economics in Nigeria, it would be amazing for people to grow through knowing about Nigerian cuisine, identity, and all of that. So anyway, so I started getting closer to this idea of wanting to teach and knowing that I couldn't do geology forever.
Yeah.
The big thing for me was money. Like, how am I going to be able to fund my life?
Yeah.
I have 3 children, school fees, rent? How am I going to be able to fund my life? Not so much my lifestyle, but fund my life with food. In the course of the time at work, working as a geologist, I'd built up skills, particularly project management, ideation, creativity, strategy skills. And I found out that I could bring them into the food world and the food space in novel ways, new ways, things, I could do things that people weren't familiar with. And so I found myself actually having a lot of clients who wanted to tap into that creative side. So I started, making some money.
Right.
The critical thing was, and it was a question you asked me, I was like, okay, so how much do you need to live?
Right.
Yeah. How much do you need to live for a year if you don't work at Shell anymore? And that was the scariest question because I had no idea. I had no idea about what I should be thinking about, medical, what it costs to run my home a month.
Right.
Because when I had a salary, it was literally,
you're doing
just,
it as
it comes up. Somebody needs this. It didn't really require a lot of forethought or planning. Right. So I think the first step was in someone asking me a difficult question and me forcing myself
to think about it and answer it.
In spite of my discomfort and my fear, to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to budget for, medical insurance exists. Okay, I'm going to find out what it costs and how, and so just going through the motion of actually sitting down in spite of the fear to think about what it cost me a year, what I needed to do, just gave me clarity. And the courage came from having an end goal, teaching. I could reverse engineer and backtrack and say, okay, to become a teacher, what do I need to do? And I figured out that I needed to go back to school, and I wanted to go back to school to study food, to do a degree in food studies. So having that further study in mind is really what propelled me to, because for further study, I had to apply. I didn't get in, but it gave me courage and kind of helped me pave the way to leaving. Right.
You talked about like skill sets, you talked about having the project management background and then all the different skill sets that you've brought to what it is that you're doing. And I think for me, and I'm sure for most people, this is something that I've seen sort of stand you out, right? From a lot of the people in your space is like, you bring this, you bring these skills, then you bring the excellence, right? Which is like, there's the photography. I do this by myself. You pretty much go around, take photos, you write, so it's not just about the food, but it's about storytelling around the food as well. You want people to see, you want people to read and understand, like, information and knowledge about the food that you're presenting and all of that. I'm saying this because I think that whenever people think about people who work with food, the thought process is that they're enjoying it. It's just food. You just cook. Ozoz makes a lot of money from cooking. But there's just so much that goes into it, especially now that you're working with brands as well, and you do stuff, here and there that is now professional as well. So I just want you to just sort of, tell me about what goes on behind the scenes, because even just coming to eat in your house, that's a process on its own. Right.
So food is an experience. And the best experiences don't have to be fancy. Like I say, I love Gary. But for me, when I want to soak Gary, like there has ice cubes, sugar cubes, Ijebu Gary, a glass bowl, groundnut or coconut. Like for me, and then when I sit down to put it all together, there's so many things that get awakened. Memories of soaking Gary when I was 7, my brother falling off a bus because he watched me and my friend basically hang off a bus and then he fell, and I was so afraid to tell my mom, but the first thing I did when I got home was go and soak Gary, and somebody else told her. But just all the memories, there's so many memories that are tied to that. And so for me, food is always that experience. And so when I always think of it as food is more than eating. Maybe I'm having a plate of amala and ewedu where did the amala come from? Who invented yam flour, and who understood that it could be this whole other thing? How did they know that it would go so perfectly with ewedu? Who's the farmer farming ewedu? What are the best ways to farm ewedu? So for me, there's so much. There's history, there's culture, there's identity, there's biology, there's agriculture, there's economics. There's so many things that end up on the plate. So whenever I look at a plate of food, it just isn't. It's not just the function of this food is going to fill me up, but it's all the other different diverse things that are linked to it, and that's what I find incredibly fascinating. So when I want to make something, sometimes it takes days to even make one recipe, because one day I might go to the market, take photos, the next day I might cook, and then it'll be too dark for me to take a nice photo of the finished dish. So I might take that photo on the final day. I'm not talking about having written the recipe long before I even went to the market. So a lot of times by the time I get to the kitchen, it's almost like a project, right? Different phases. I assess what I have at home. I assess what I need to buy. I plan. And then execution, which is the cooking, is kind of like the last thing. There's a whole series of things that go into it. And so when people look at things and they're like, it isn't just a simple thing. I'm like, no, it actually takes a lot of work.
Yeah, it really does.
A lot of work. So I don't, and for that reason, I can't criticize another cook or chef because I know what it takes to get into the kitchen to create something. I might not like it. It doesn't mean that it's the other chef's food or cook's food is not good.
Right.
It's different to me, but it takes a lot of energy, to marshal and put together something that looks nice.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, but then yours doesn't even stop there, is where I'm going. So it's like, it looks nice, and then you take it and you amplify this whole story about it. You first have to capture it in its niceness, and then you amplify the story about it, and then you respond to what people think, or what what I mean. Like, people start to share their opinions about it, and then you respond to that. So it's almost as if you live this.
No, and I honestly really believe that I'm doing what I should be doing. I haven't always been in that space, but I know without a shadow of a doubt that I'm living and doing the things that I should be doing. That food is my calling. I know that. I wake up every morning with, some of the ideas that I come up with, I know that it can't just be me. And some of the ways I have to share the story, it's beyond me. It's beyond me. So if one person can find comfort, if one person can be inspired by the process or the look or something, if it can connect us in some way, because for instance, there's so many Nigerian dishes that you'll find in the Caribbean and in South and Central America. And if food can be that red thread that, helps us understand each other and helps us even be more compassionate and kinder to one another, just from the simple fact that we have things in common, then, I think that's the work that I'm called to do.
Right. Is there ever a point in time where you maybe create something and then it doesn't turn out like you envisioned it?
All the time.
And, and like, what lessons do you usually learn from moments like that?
In 2010, I learned that you could learn more from failure than you could from success. I think before 2010, so 2010 I attended this conference, Women in Networking, and I learned so many things. But one of them, like I said, is that you can learn from failure. Before that, I wouldn't have actively sat down to review my failures. But after then, I started doing that. So when a recipe fails, or when I fail in trying to communicate something to someone, I actually sit down and reflect on it. Okay, what happened here? What could I have done? Could I have done this earlier? Could I have communicated this in this way? But there are opportunities to see what you can do better next time, because there will be a next time. And having those lessons extracted from the failures actually help you prepare better. So I'm very open to failure. I feel less these days because I also spend more time preparing. And I think just that extra time up front, whether it's thinking about a recipe, thinking about when one thing goes in the pot or in the pan, thinking about remembering previous experiences where maybe adding something earlier changed the color, which had a bad effect on the overall look of a dish. You know, remembering those things also goes into it. So there's a lot that goes into recreating post failure. But failure is important. Failure is good. Failure is how you learn.
I agree. I agree. And for people who are afraid to sort of, you know, pursue their dreams to the best of their ability, it's usually that fear of failure. You know, it's fear of failure. There's a lot that, you know, they're just worried and concerned about, and then it doesn't allow them to fully approach what it is that they have in their hearts to do. But then with people who are going through such situations, like, what sort of lessons or advice would you give them about pursuing their dreams?
One life. In 2 words, you literally have one life. And I remember that when fear wants to stop me from emailing someone who I think can help me accomplish my next dream or my next desire. I literally have one life, and we can lose it quite suddenly. I mean, I say that because my father died of a heart attack like this. And one day we're talking about seeing him that weekend. The next day he was gone. And I remember at that time my sister had given me this gold bangle. Yeah. And I was, I used to keep my stuff away, special things I reserved for special occasions. And then my sister said to me one day, I was like, oh, when should I wear that gold bangle? Am I going to an event this weekend? This was like 18 years ago. And my sister was like, please wear the thing. Wear that bangle. You could die tomorrow. And, and that really changed my mindset. And so I found myself, I don't save anything. If I'm keeping something, it's because, okay, maybe I don't have the energy to unbox or go through so at home, I use my best set of plates to eat every day. My kids eat with the best of everything that I have, because we have one day, each day is given unto us. We have to make the best of it. So do it in spite of the fear. And I know that it sounds very motivational speaker.
Which is not a bad thing.
No, it's not a bad thing, but really, literally, what's the worst thing that could happen? I always say, well, okay, I approach someone and they don't want to do something with me. Fine, I know. Then I can move on to asking the next person. But if I stay and I say, oh, I'm afraid to ask this person.
Right.
And I always think about it differently. I remember going to ask for feedback once and being really afraid to ask one of my bosses for feedback. And my mentor said to me, why would you be afraid to ask your boss for feedback? If your boss came to ask you for feedback, how would you feel? I'm like, oh, I'd be honored, and I'd be willing to tell him, share with him what he could do better, where he might act differently. I would be open to helping him. Yeah. So then why do you feel different about someone else being open to helping you?
Right.
Sometimes I think we need to turn it on ourselves and see how would we react.
Perspective. Yes. How you choose to see it or receive it.
Precisely. So my perspective changed about my approach to things. Yes, I'm afraid, but I'm going to ask anyway. Because before I ask, I already have a no, right? But asking actually changes the odds, and the odds could change in my favor. So rather than staying with that no that you have banked, that you have for sure when you don't ask, why not even attempt? It's an attempt, right? So why not attempt to change the odds and doing that honestly has brought me more open doors and has expanded the sphere of possibilities for me. I've asked people, and being sure they would say no, they've said yes. And actually, the few times I've had the courage to, it's actually gone on to transform my life. What I've learned, though, is that I have to be prepared to, if I'm going to someone with an ask, I have to have done my homework. I have to have outlined what my objectives are. So you have
to do the work on your end first.
Precisely. I have to come correct, come prepared, come ready to say, I want to ask you for your help in this area. I want us to collaborate on this because this is why this is important to me. This is what I've done. This is what I intend to do. So can we work together? And,
your kids get so much involved in some of the stuff that you do. Like a lot of times you share stuff on online, and it's like they're cooking and they're making stuff, and they're trying, and it's like by trial by error, and then they make some of the most amazing things, right? Was that intentional, or how did that happen, or did they just pick it up?
I think it's intentional. I realized that growing up, I knew the things that my parents were interested in. My mom loved flowers, still loves flowers. My dad liked electronics and everything in the kitchen. And I think having that knowledge of my parents as human beings, besides being parents and work as an adult, made me closer to them, made me understand them a little bit more. And I think it actually prepared me to be a better parent. Not the best parent, but a better parent. And I think that I want my children to see me as an individual, removed from mother, worker, friend, sister, as a person. So I want them to see the things that I enjoy.
Stripped of the titles.
Yes. But I also want them to understand why I enjoy these things, see the function of them, and just involve them in my life, And I couldn't involve them as much when I was a geologist. I tried, like we would look for rocks when we went out, and we would take field trips sometimes. But I want them to know me, and I want them to be involved, and I want them to enjoy the things that I enjoy too, but also be able to find their own paths. And they'll soon go off to school, and they'll have to cook for themselves. And, it's always nice to have something that you are good at, especially if it relates to one of the fundamental needs of man. So they should be, it's nice that they can cook, but also that they can explore food as a beautiful thing.
Fundamental needs of man. Sometimes we forget that that's what food really
that's what it
right?
is.
But with all of this stuff that you do, yes, I know food, you're passionate about food, but what else is that the driving force behind what it is that you're doing? So I don't know if it's just the passion that is driving you. Is there anything else that is driving that?
I think a strong sense of identity. Who am I? Whose am I, and what am I called for? I found that all the times that I've had defining moments with food, I've had them abroad, right? And so for me, there's a global perspective as well to my desire. The first time I ate without stress, I was in Edinburgh. I was 9. We'd been out all day. I ate food. My father was shocked. The second time I found myself drawn to food, I was at university in Liverpool. I was very unhappy, homesick. But every time I got into the kitchen and tried to create jollof or something, I was like, it took me back to home. It gave me a sense of where I was coming from. And then the last defining moment is when I started my blog. At that time, I lived in the Netherlands. And it was just about, oh my God, Nigerian food is amazing. Like before 2009, I ate and I enjoyed Nigerian food, but I didn't think of it as anything that was amazing beyond Nigeria. What changed was I went out to dinner with colleagues one night, and a Brazilian friend of mine a colleague of mine was talking about this bean fritter. And the more he spoke, the more puzzled I looked, because in my head I was like, that's akara. And at the end of the conversation, he was like, oh, we have acarajé in Brazil. And I'm like, what? How? And he was like, oh, the enslaved people brought it from Africa. Right. And yes, he said Africa, but I knew it was Nigeria. And I started researching. That actually opened me up to a whole world, because I started researching about acarajé, and it was something that had been in existence for 300 years, because the earliest enslaved people went to Brazil in like the 15th and 16th century, and they started making acarajé, and it came from Nigeria. In fact, it came from the Ilesha area, where it's called akara osu, or akara Ijesha. And I think I was mind blown, because I didn't realize that Nigerian food had so much history. Like, we just take all the things we eat, we just eat them, and we never really worry about where they come from. I think that unlocked it actually opened up a portal for me, because I'm like, akara is so many years old. It is now national treasure in Brazil, in Bahia. northeastern part of Brazil, and it came from Nigeria. Why didn't I know about these connections? Why didn't I know about these roots? What else am I missing? What other things are rooted? What other Nigerian foods exist around the world? And with each research, I found out that, in Cuba, in El Salvador, so many parts of South and Central America and the Caribbean, there are foods that actually originated from Nigeria. So the desire, the idea that enslaved people could be torn from their homelands and still retain recipes, oral history and traditions, nothing really written down, but could still hold on to these for hundreds of years, was almost parallel to my story of being abroad and being homesick,
right,
and using food as this comfort and anchor and strengthener. And I think just the fact that Nigerian food exists beyond, it exists beyond Nigerian borders or Nigeria's borders, was just mind-blowing. And I want to be part of the people who document that history and that culture and dig up stories and help people understand that we have food that's worthy of being celebrated around the world, that's worthy of being celebrated at home. So my love for food is really tied to identity, to wanting to preserve culture and heritage and just help Nigerians at home and in diaspora really be confident of how excellent our food is and how worthy it is of being on global tables. And the impact it has had on global cuisines. Like I said, acarajé is immortalizing UNESCO's intangible cultural heritage for Brazil. So many foods from Africa, Nigeria, exist around the world in preserved, treasured spaces. I want us to know that.
And that was sort of maybe the transition to the new Nigerian kitchen.
Yes.
The whole idea for the new Nigerian kitchen was you trying to show this.
Precisely, to celebrate Nigerian cuisine in all aspects, as many aspects as I can grasp.
And then you now started having like a fascination with jollof rice as well, right?
Yes!
Because I know you did a project on that. What were your findings from that project?
Jollof rice is from Senegal, first of all.
Okay.
I know that jollof rice has existed in Nigeria since at least 1910 from a cookbook that was written predominantly on northern Nigerian / British cuisine. I just found this book a few months ago. Because I feel like dates are important. Because I want to prove that we have a rich culinary history that stretches back hundreds of years. So jollof rice is important on so many levels. It connects West Africa on many fronts. Yeah. There's jollof rice in every West African country. It goes by a different name, but it exists. It exists as a kind of celebratory dish. Originally came from Senegal, from the Wolof tribe. In the 14th century, there's actually a Jollof state, but it was spelled with one L. So Jolof. But Nigerians obviously do it great, So
she has to say that.
Yeah, just for the record, in case other countries, neighboring countries, like countries like four borders away, starting with G, in case they want to contest.
And you tried all the different ones.
Yes. I think for me, it's the idea of how we're connected,
but
also how, even in the midst of that connection, we all have different expressions. I think it's almost akin to human beings. We're all human, and there are common threads that run through us, but we express ourselves and we show up in different ways, and they're not bad. One isn't necessarily better than the other. They're just different. And they're things that we can actually learn from the difference, things we can actually use to engage our senses. It's also interesting because though African rice is one of the 2 cultivated varieties of rice in the world, the other being Asian, a lot of the other ingredients from jollof went local to Africa. Right. So tomatoes came from South America, Bolivia, Peru. Chilies came from Mexico. Ginger originally came from Asia. Garlic, thyme that we use in our jollof rice came from the Mediterranean. Curry powder is a British construct, but it has its roots in Indian cuisine. So for me, it's looking at all the different ingredients that come together to create this one pot.
So melting pot is literal. Literal. It comes from, like, if you put all these things on a map, there's a spread across the world. And yes, we forcefully claim it as ours, but it's really a unification of sorts. And I feel like there's that approach to being able to absorb different things from different parts of the world, yet create something that is uniquely Nigerian or African or uniquely mine or yours. We're a product of different influences. And can you just tell me, like, a quote or a principle that you live by, and just tell me what that means to you.
Quote.
Well, it could be a principle, it could be just something that you live by.
Live to the fullness of each day. Each day. The day I determine that I'm going to watch Netflix, I do it to, like, when I leave, whether it's binge watching Suits or street food or something, when I'm done, I'm done. If that's my purpose for the day, that's my purpose for the day. And the funny thing is, sometimes I come away from those, almost every time I come away from those with ideas of what next. I come away inspired. To create something based on something I've seen in my recreational period, something I've seen in my downtime or my resting time. Fired up, clarity, direction, inspiration. I'm very much about balance, about fulfilling all the aspects of, if I think of life as like a pie chart, each segment has its purpose, and no segment should take precedence over everything else. When I worked, one of the things that scared me was work impacted everything. So if I failed at work, everything else was horrible. It didn't matter whether I was a good mother. I would see myself as a bad mother, a bad parent, bad friend. Work colored everything. But I had to learn that work was just one slice of that pie. And I could deal with what it was at work. It required me learning to deal with stuff. Whereas, I used to want to run away from things. But just this approach and perspective made me stand up and made me bolder about confronting aspects of my life that I wasn't happy with, and just dealing with them as difficult as they were, because I knew that if I didn't do that, it would just cast a cloud over everything. So just each segment has its importance: spirituality, rest, recreation, time for creativity, TV, whatever it is, it has its purpose, and that's important for you to realize. And I've also learned to drop my hero complex. I used to be, I can save the world. Something is happening. Ozoz to the rescue. But I realized that is silly of me, one. And also that literally I can't save the world.
Yes.
I can try to make things better, but just this enormous pressure and burden to be and to do, no, not anymore, no. Especially not after 40. No way.
I love it.
No way. No.
I love the new Ozoz too.
I cannot go and kill myself.
It's important to know that, and that's beautiful to hear. Thank you so much, Ozoz, for being on the show. Thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself on this. Where can people find you online?
First space, my blog, kitchenbutterfly.com. Instagram, my current preferred journaling tool, I think of it. That's what I think of Instagram as. At Kitchen Butterfly. Twitter, at Kitchen Butterfly, but no E in the kitchen. Occasionally Facebook, Ozoz Sokoh. Thank you for having me on. It's
awesome. It was beautiful experience.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
What's up, Lumination Tribe? Subscribe to this channel for more insightful and impactful learning. Check out our website, luminaworld.com, for show episodes, resources, and events. Let's continue this journey of growth.